Hey guys, tonight we're going somewhere where your stomach wakes you before the sun does, because it's been empty since yesterday's crust of bread. The cold bites your fingers even before you get out of bed, and outside, frost has turned the ground into stone. You pull on the same wool tunic you've worn for years, the one with patches that tell their own history, and step into the dark, knowing that by the time the sun sets, your back will ache, your hands will bleed, and most of what you harvest will belong to someone else. This is life under the Lord's rule. Not the Lord, as in some kind voice from the heavens. No, this one lives up on the hill in a hall with a roof that doesn't leak, eating meat you'll never taste. You work his land, you follow his orders, and you pay him in crops, labor, and even special taxes for things like getting married. In return, he offers you protection, which mostly means his knights will scare away anyone trying to steal from him. And yet, there are whispers of serfs who have it better. A good harvest year, a kinder lord, a patch of land that doesn't flood every spring. On those rare days you might actually have enough bread to eat until you're full, maybe even a little ale to share at the tavern. But those are exceptions. The kind of stories you hold on to when the mud is up to your ankles and the wind is stealing the heat from your bones. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop a comment below with the city you're in and the exact time you're listening to this. I like to imagine us all sharing this little moment across centuries and time zones. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up before the sun even thinks about rising. Not because you want to, but because the cold, sharp and merciless, has crept into your small hut and dug its icy claws deep into your bones. The air inside your home is a chilling whisper of frost and damp earth. Your breath puffs out in frosty clouds that mingle with the faint remnants of smoke lingering from the hearth fire that died hours ago. There's no warm glow, no comforting crackle, just cold ash and the heavy silence of pre-dawn. Your bed isn't a bed as you might think of it today. It's a straw tick, a sack stuffed with dried grass harvested last autumn. Beneath the tick, the floor is bare earth, hard and uneven. You can smell the musty scent of dry straw mingling with something less pleasant, the unmistakable odor of mice and fleas. The bed bugs, well, they don't need an invitation. They've been with you for years, guests that never leave. Scratching only wakes the others, so you endure their itchy company silently, as you have every night for as long as you can remember. Your wool blanket, thin and rough, smells faintly of damp sheep and sweat. It's been patched more times than you can count, and you suspect the patchwork will soon fall apart entirely. But for now, it's what you have to hold back the cold. You try to tuck it tighter around you, but the chill still sneaks inside. It feels like the cold has a mind of its own, determined to make sure you never get truly warm. Some villagers swear by a strange old trick, heating stones in the fire and slipping them under the straw to warm the bed. It sounds clever, but historians are still divided on whether it actually helped or simply roasted the fleas into a more aggressive breed. Either way, you don't have a heated stone tonight, just your stubborn body heat, which is fading fast. You lie still for a moment, listening. Outside, the world is wrapped in silence, broken only by the faint crackling of ice forming on the thatched roof above your head. The wooden beams groan softly in the cold, and the wind slips through gaps in the wattle and daub walls, whispering promises of a bitter day ahead. Your stomach growls, a hollow reminder of the simple fact. You're about to start a long day with very little fuel. The bread you will eat this morning is already waiting, cold and hard, beside the small cup of ale that is safer to drink than water. Somewhere in the distance, a rooster crows, not your rooster, mind you, but the Lord's. It's the daily summons to labor ringing clear through the cold air. The bird's call is harsh, an unwanted herald that your life is not your own. You finally push yourself up, your limbs stiff and protesting. Your feet hit the cold, packed earth floor. You shuffle to the small peg where your clothes hang. A rough wool tunic, patched and worn, and beneath it, a linen shirt, thin and threadbare. You pull the tunic over your head, the wool itching fiercely against your skin. You've worn this tunic for months. The scent of animals and earth clings to it like a second skin. The hose on your legs are similarly threadbare, patched with scraps of cloth that tell silent stories of past seasons' hardships. Outside, the sky is still dark. Smoke rises from chimneys across the village, thin ribbons twisting into the cold air. The frozen ground crunches beneath the footsteps of your neighbors, waking slowly, drawn by the same unrelenting rhythm of serf life. A child stumbles, chasing a chicken, laughing and slipping on the frost-hardened dirt. The bird flaps away triumphantly, leaving the child breathless but smiling. The scent of manure drifts from the barnyard, foul to an outsider, but to you, it's the smell of survival, of daily life. Your hand brushes over the wooden handle of your hoe, leaning quietly against the wall. The tools of your toil wait silently, eager and unyielding. Breakfast is as modest as you feared. You reach for the hunk of black rye bread, its crust hard enough to knock on the door with, and the inside dense, gritty with bran and occasional whole kernels. This bread isn't baked for delight, it's baked for endurance. The Lord's mill grinds the grain, and you pay a heavy toll in flour just to get this bread. 1 sack out of every 20 ground is claimed by the miller who serves the Lord. The grain you grow, the bread you eat, all part of a system designed to keep you working. You bite slowly, savoring the small amount of nourishment the bread offers. It's dry and tough, demanding your attention with every chew. Alongside it, the ale, a weak, sour brew made from last year's barley, slides down your throat. It's safer than water, which is often contaminated, but its taste leaves much to be desired. Neighbors gather, exchanging murmurs and complaints. The miller's new ox has a habit of falling asleep mid-grind, they say, a joke about the pace of village life and the grinding monotony of serfdom. You take another bite, another sip, steeling yourself for the day ahead. Dressing is a ritual of endurance. Your tunic, thick woolen and patched from years of use, itches fiercely against your skin. Beneath it, your linen shirt, thin, soft, and worn through in places, is your only comfort. Your hose, once warm and snug, are now threadbare and wrapped in additional strips of cloth to keep the biting cold at bay. Your leather shoes, cracked and stiff from years of wear, are laced tightly. They protect your feet just enough to keep you going, but little more. Every pair is patched, every sole thinned, every buckle worn. The tools come next. Your hoe, handle smooth from generations of calloused hands, rests against the wall. The wooden rake, teeth uneven and worn, stands ready. The plow belongs to the village, a massive beast requiring oxen and teamwork. But for now, it waits in the barn, a promise of heavier labor to come. Outside, the village is stirring. Smoke curls lazily from chimneys, the cold air filled with murmurs and soft footsteps. You nod silently to neighbors, sharing the quiet acknowledgement of another long day. You pause at your small garden patch, a few hardy cabbages and leeks braving the frost. It's the only piece of earth truly yours, a small hope, a flicker of independence in a life otherwise bound by duty. Beyond lies the Lord's land, vast and unyielding, waiting for your labor. You tighten your belt and step out into the cold dawn, ready, or at least resigned, to face the day. Historians still debate the true extent of serf life's harshness. Some believe there were moments of joy, community gatherings, and small freedoms within the manor. Others emphasize the relentless weight of taxes, duties, and toil, painting a picture of near-constant survival. What is certain is this: as the first light of dawn spreads across the frosted fields, you rise, not as a free man, but as a serf, bound to the land and the Lord who owns it. You step outside your hut into the biting chill of early morning. The air is heavy with dampness, and the low-hanging gray clouds promise more rain before the day is done. Your feet sink slightly into the soft earth, a mixture of mud, clay, and last night's leftover puddles. This patch of land before you, the so-called field you tend, is a stubborn stretch of mud and weeds, a tiny corner of the Lord's vast estate that you've been assigned to work. You call it yours, but it really isn't. This land is His, and every handful of soil you till, every seed you plant, every sprout you nurture, ultimately belongs to Him. The mud clings greedily to your boots, thick and cold, as if trying to keep you grounded where you are. It pulls at your feet, slows your every step, and you curse it silently as you trudge forward. The soil is heavy and wet, clotted with sticky clumps that are hard to break up, and you know it will be a hard day's work just to coax a harvest from this reluctant earth. In your hands, your hoe feels heavy and familiar. The wooden handle is worn smooth by generations of work, shaped by the hands of your ancestors who toiled here before you. The iron blade is chipped and dull but still strong enough to pry stubborn roots from the mud. This tool is your constant companion, a blunt instrument in a long battle against weeds, pests, and the unpredictable weather. You crouch low, pressing the hoe into the damp ground and levering it up to loosen the soil. The smell is earthy and sharp, mixed with the faint tang of manure, the essential fertilizer that the Lord's farmhands spread to keep the soil fertile. The aroma is strong, sometimes unpleasant, but it is the scent of life and survival in this hard land. Around you the village slowly wakes. The smoke from chimneys curls into the gray sky, carrying the scent of burning wood and cooking fires. Neighbors shuffle past, their faces drawn and tired, dressed in patched and threadbare clothes that speak of long winters and scarce resources. They nod silently, acknowledging you with brief smiles or weary grunts. There's no time or energy for much conversation at dawn. The fields stretch in every direction, a patchwork of muddy earth and struggling crops. Thick weeds choke some rows. Young shoots of rye and barley stand pale and fragile in others. You glance toward the Lord's manor house, perched on a rise overlooking the village, a stone fortress with narrow windows and a high wall, a constant reminder of who holds power here. You think about the land itself. The medieval feudal system binds you to this place. Serfs like you are legally tied to the manor, and the land you tend is owned by the Lord. You don't own the fields, you rent them with your labor and a heavy share of your harvest. Your family's right to live here depends on obedience and payment is almost always in grain. The taxes are brutal. Over half of what you grow will be claimed by the Lord as rent, tithes, and fees. Sometimes it feels like no matter how hard you work, you're simply planting for someone else's benefit. Your own family's survival depends on the scraps that remain after the Lord's share is taken. As you work, your hands ache from the cold and the rough wood of the hoe. The soil sticks to your gloves and the wet mud seeps through your patched shoes. Your knees press into the cold earth, leaving damp imprints on your trousers. The chill gnaws at your bones and your breath comes out in small clouds. Weeds grow everywhere, thistles with prickly leaves, nettles that sting if you brush them wrong, creeping grasses that choke the young crops. You pull and dig, fighting a losing battle. The weeds seem to grow faster than the grain, mocking your efforts. Village lore says these plants are nature's way of punishing human greed, or perhaps the work of witches and spirits. Your grandmother swore by certain herbs to protect the fields, but today you just keep pulling and sweating. You pause to wipe the rain and mud from your face. The drizzle has turned into a steady rain, soaking your clothes and making the soil heavier. The rain is a blessing for the crops but a curse for your work. The mud thickens, sticking to everything, turning the day's labor into a slog. Nearby, the village mill grinds slowly, the sound carried faintly on the wind. Like everything else, the mill is the Lord's property. You must take your grain there to be ground into flour, but the miller claims a hefty tax, a 20th of what you bring. The miller is an unyielding man, and his cut means you keep even less of your harvest. Sometimes you wonder if it's better to eat raw grain than hand over so much of your hard-earned work. Your stomach rumbles as you think of last night's supper. A thick slice of rye bread, tough and dense enough to double as a doorstop, washed down with watered-down ale. The bread is heavy and gritty, made from coarse grains ground in the Lord's mill. It's barely enough to fill your belly, but it's all you have. The village follows the three-field system, rotating crops to keep the soil fertile. Each year, one field lies fallow, resting. This practice is designed to prevent soil exhaustion, but to you, it feels like wasted ground. Leaving land unplanted when hunger stalks the village is a bitter irony. Scholars today still debate how effective this system was, and whether it was enforced strictly or flexibly. For you, it is simply law, no matter how hungry you are. The weather is a constant threat. Too much rain floods the fields, too little dries up the crops. Last summer's drought was harsh, and many families starved or barely survived. You remember the cracked earth and scorched stalks, the way the village turned to prayer and barter for what little food remained. This season's rain offers hope, but the cold mud is unforgiving. You hear voices nearby and look up to see neighbors working their own fields. Their faces are lined with fatigue and determination, their clothes soaked and patched like yours. They greet you with brief nods and grunts, sharing complaints about the taxes or the weather. Community is fragile but necessary, a small comfort in hard times. The Lord's overseer stands at the edge of the fields, clipboard or tally book in hand, eyes sharp and unforgiving. His presence is a reminder of the strict hierarchy you live under. Disobedience means punishment. Productivity and loyalty are demanded. The overseer's gaze roves over your work, making you hurry your pace. You think of the tools you carry, the hoe, the rake, the plow, and the dangers they bring. A careless swing can mean a broken finger or worse, but there's no time for accidents. The fields must be worked every day or risk falling behind. Despite the hardship, small moments of kindness keep you going. A neighbor offers extra seed, a child laughs briefly while chasing a chicken, a shared meal breaks the monotony. These flickers of warmth are a fragile thread in a life woven of mud and labor. As the day wears on, your muscles ache and your clothes are soaked through. The mud pulls at your boots and your hands are raw from toil. Yet you press on, bound by duty, necessity, and the stubborn hope that one day, your family might reap the fruits of your labor. Historians still debate the realities of serfdom, how harsh life truly was, and whether serfs could find pockets of freedom and autonomy. For you, the land is both prison and home, a muddy patchwork of survival and surrender. As dusk approaches, you gather your tools and trudge back toward the village. The mud squelches with every step and the cold sinks deeper into your bones. The Lord's manor looms above, a reminder of the endless cycle you live. Tonight, you will rest your aching body and dream of better fields. Fields where the soil is yours and the harvest feeds your family, not another. You wake up, dragging yourself from whatever scraps of sleep you managed between the cold and the creaky floorboards of your hut. Your eyes blink against the dim light, filtering through the smoke-stained window. Now it's time for the part you probably dread as much as the work itself, getting dressed. Fashion? You scoff silently. What fashion? The clothes you wear are as much a part of your identity as the mud on your boots, patched, threadbare, and ancient enough to have outlived several of your relatives. The first thing you do is pull on your undergarments, a thin linen shirt, rough against your skin but better than nothing. It's probably seen a dozen winters, mended so many times that the original fabric is more patchwork than cloth. You tug it over your head, feeling the familiar scratchiness and the faint smell of smoke and sweat, a scent that clings stubbornly to all your garments. Next comes your woolen tunic, thick and heavy. This tunic has seen countless repairs, patches of darker wool sewn in with uneven stitches that you know well, done by your mother's patient hands. The wool it's made from isn't the soft stuff that nobles wear, it's coarse and itchy, but it traps what little warmth there is against the cold mornings. You pull it on, feeling the weight settle on your shoulders. It's the same tunic you wore last winter and the winter before that and likely the winter before that. Some say a serf's clothes should last a lifetime, or close to it. Your trousers, more accurately called hose or breeches, are little better. Made from rough-spun wool or even linen, they've been patched and darned repeatedly, fabric layers adding to the bulk. You wrap ragged strips of cloth around your lower legs, bindings meant to keep out the cold and the biting mud. The bindings loosen easily and slip down, a constant nuisance that you tie and retie throughout the day. For footwear you have simple leather shoes, soft and worn. The soles are thin and patched in multiple places with scraps of hide or extra cloth. Winter or summer, the same shoes serve you. You only get new ones if your feet start to bleed through holes. The cold often finds its way inside, creeping up through every crack. You pull a hooded cloak over everything. It's your shield against rain, wind, and frost, made of a heavy, coarse fabric dyed a dull, muddy brown. It smells faintly of wet dog and earth, and it drags the damp after you like a reluctant shadow. This cloak has been your constant companion through storms, harsh winters, and long days in the fields. As you get dressed, your fingers linger over the stitches holding patches in place. Your family is skilled at mending, using whatever scraps they can find, old clothing, torn sacks, bits of linen. It's a skill passed down through generations, a necessity born of poverty and scarcity. You joke sometimes that your clothes are more patched than cloth, a walking quilt of your family's history. You look in the small mirror you've made from polished metal. a gift from the Lord Smith, rusted and scratched but functional. Your face is pale and gaunt, eyes bright despite the fatigue. The mirror's reflection shows the reality of serf life, a face marked by weather, work, and worry. Your mother calls from the next room, reminding you to finish dressing before the overseer arrives. You pull on your leather belt, which holds a small pouch for carrying seeds or tools. The belt is cracked and worn but still strong enough to do its job. Outside, the village stirs. You exchange greetings with neighbors, their faces familiar and weary. Morning, you say, voice rough from early rising. They nod, dressed in the same patched and faded clothes, their footsteps echoing your own in the mud. You gather your tools for the day, a hoe with a cracked handle, a rake missing several tines, and a small spade with a bent blade. Each tool has a story, tales of past harvests, accidents, and repairs. The hoe's handle is wrapped in leather strips for grip, worn smooth where your hands hold it tight during long hours of labor. As you step outside, the chill hits you again, seeping through the layers and into your bones. The same clothes that kept you warm last winter feel damp and heavy in the morning rain. You remind yourself that these clothes are better than nothing, better than going naked to face the mud and cold. You think about the nobles you've seen, their bright, finely woven garments shimmering in the sunlight. Silks, velvets, furs trimmed with gold and jewels. Their clothes are a different language, one of wealth and power. For you, fashion is practical, functional, and frayed at the edges. The fabric you wear is homespun, sometimes coarse enough to scratch, but it's what keeps you alive. Some villagers collect feathers or buttons to decorate their cloaks, small signs of pride in an otherwise harsh existence. You once found a lost brass button on the road and sewed it onto your cloak. It gleamed brightly in the sun, a tiny spark of joy in your otherwise drab attire. You also think about the seasonal clothing changes, or rather, the lack thereof. Summer or winter, your clothes are largely the same, with the addition of a few extra layers when the frost bites. The idea of a wardrobe, of changing outfits for different days or occasions, seems a distant luxury. Your clothing is a tool of survival, patched and worn but always ready. Your family's needlework skills come in handy again when you spot a tear in your sleeve. You stop briefly to mend it with rough stitches, using a scrap of cloth saved from an old sack. Your mother's voice echoes in your memory, teaching you the importance of mending. "A stitch in time saves 9, she'd say with a weary smile. You glance down at your hands, calloused and stained with dirt and dye. These hands tell the story of your life. A lifetime of labor, endless mending, planting, harvesting, and surviving. Each patch on your clothes is a chapter in that story, sewn with care and necessity. As you prepare to head out to the fields, you run a finger over the hood of your cloak, pulling it up to shield your face from the cold drizzle. The fabric is stiff from dampness but familiar, a comforting barrier against the world. You step into the muddy path leading toward the Lord's fields, your boots sinking slightly with each step. The day stretches before you, filled with labor and uncertainty. Your clothes may be ragged and patched, but they carry you through, shielding you from the elements and the harsh realities of your life. In this world of mud, toil, and survival, fashion is a distant dream. What matters is endurance, the ability to keep going despite the cold, the mud, and the relentless demands of the Lord. Historians still debate how much serfs could influence their clothing, whether they had access to better materials or were stuck in endless cycles of patched wool and linen. Some evidence suggests occasional gifts or purchases, but for most, clothing was a matter of necessity, not choice. You take a deep breath and prepare yourself for the day ahead, knowing that your clothes, like your life, are worn but enduring, stitched together with care and hope. You wake up once again to that gnawing emptiness deep inside, the kind of hunger that isn't just a fleeting annoyance but a persistent shadow dogging your every step. The cold air seeps into your bones, making your fingers stiff and your breath come out in visible puffs, but the hunger is sharper than the chill. You sit on your rough wooden stool by the small, cracked table, your fingers brushing over the chipped ceramic bowl that holds the morning's offering, thin gruel and a piece of bread that's more stone than food. The gruel is barely warm, a watery concoction made from barley or rye, boiled down to the point where it's more liquid than solid. Occasionally you find a limp pea or two bobbing on the surface. Its taste is faint, watery, and slightly bitter, often carrying the faintest hint of soil, an unwelcome seasoning that's all too common when you're living so close to the earth. Your bread is a thick, dark slice of rye, baked days ago and left to harden until it could practically serve as a weapon. You joke to yourself that it could hold the door closed in a storm, but the joke is bitter because, really, this bread is all that stands between your stomach and a gnawing emptiness. Meanwhile, miles away in the Lord's great hall, the morning has begun with the bustle of cooks and servants preparing a feast that would seem unimaginable to you. Huge spits turn over roaring fires, slowly roasting boar and fattened chickens basted in honey and herbs. The air is thick with the sense of sizzling meat, spiced wine, and freshly baked pastries glazed with honey and sprinkled with cinnamon. A spice so precious it's worth more than gold. Tables beneath grand chandeliers are laid with silver platters heaped with fruits imported from distant lands, cheeses aged in cool cellars, and crusty white bread softer than anything you could imagine. This feast is not merely food, it is a display of power, wealth, and status. The Lord's table is a stage where the abundance of the land he controls is flaunted in every bite. It is a reminder that he rules not just over land, but over the lives and labor of those like you, who toil day and night for so little in return. Your meager breakfast, by contrast, is a stark testament to the reality of your existence. The grain for your bread and gruel comes from the fields you work, but a large portion is claimed as tax and rent by the Lord before it ever reaches your table. The village mill, owned by the Lord, grinds the grain but takes a hefty fee, a practice known as the mill tax, which further shrinks the portion you receive. The millstone's slow, relentless grinding is a constant reminder of your place in this system, as your family's sustenance is chipped away grain by grain. An odd, almost grimly humorous fact from village life is that some serfs, desperate to stretch their meager rations, would occasionally mix a little dirt or sand into their food. It's a practice that historians debate. Was it a widespread survival tactic or an exaggerated tale born from hardship? Some scholars argue that adding grit to food could dull the hunger pangs temporarily, while others suspect it was just an unfortunate side effect of storing food in less than ideal conditions, leading to accidental contamination. Regardless, the occasional earthiness of your meals feels all too real. Your drink is ale, a sour and cloudy brew, brewed locally from barley that has already paid its share to the Lord. Unlike the sweet, spiced wines served in the manor, your ale is thin, bitter, and offers little in the way of warmth or comfort. But it's safer than drinking the often contaminated water from the village well, and so you drink it, swallowing the bitterness with the dull acceptance born from years of necessity. Occasionally, the village comes together for celebrations, harvest festivals, religious holidays, where the meal is richer, a communal stew thick with root vegetables and occasionally bits of salted meat, fresh bread baked in shared ovens, and a sense of fellowship that you savor as much as the food. But these occasions are rare bright spots in an otherwise relentless cycle of scarcity and work. Children run and play briefly, their laughter ringing through the crisp morning air before chores pull them back to the fields or the hearth. Their faces are thinner than you remember your own childhood, the signs of hunger and toil written plainly in their sunken cheeks and tired eyes. Yet even in their exhaustion, their laughter shines like a fragile flame in the dark. Your grandmother's stories about times of famine haunt your mind, years when the harvest failed and the village struggled to survive on roots, wild herbs, and whatever could be foraged. People would barter tools, blankets, and anything of value just for a handful of grain or a crust of bread. Those were desperate times when survival depended on more than hard work. It required cunning, community, and luck. Scholars still debate how varied and nutritious serfs' diets truly were. Some argue that serfs had occasional access to meat through small-scale animal husbandry or hunting, while others suggest that the diet was overwhelmingly plant-based and repetitive. Archaeological evidence paints a complex picture, and historians continue to explore how widespread malnutrition and disease shaped medieval peasant life. Despite the harshness, your mother's knowledge of wild plants offers some relief. Nettles, dandelion leaves, wild garlic, all gathered from nearby woods, add flavor and nutrients to your meals, and sometimes serve as rudimentary medicine. This knowledge is passed down quietly, a precious inheritance of survival. Waste is a foreign word here. Every crumb is treasured, every bone saved and boiled to make nourishing broth. Stale bread is softened in water before being eaten. You learn to appreciate the smallest pleasures, the subtle sweetness of a carrot, the earthy bite of a freshly pulled turnip. These moments of flavor are tiny bursts of joy in an otherwise relentless struggle. As night falls and you gather by the fire with your family, the warmth offers a rare comfort. Stories and songs weave a fragile sense of community that sustains you almost as much as the food. The resilience of your people is woven into every meal, every shared moment, every day endured. Nutrition and diet remain subjects of scholarly debate. Was meat a rare treat or an occasional reality? Did serfs' diets vary widely across regions and seasons? Historians have yet to reach consensus, but the evidence points to a life marked by scarcity and endurance. You finish your simple meal, the gruel barely enough to wet your tongue, the bread filling your belly just enough to keep hunger at bay for a few more hours. You steel yourself for the day ahead, long hours under the sun, your body aching but your spirit quietly defiant. The Lord's feast may be a world away, but your strength and resilience belong to you alone. If you've ever complained about income tax day, congratulations, you're already luckier than any medieval peasant. In the feudal world, there was no tax season. Taxes were like mud in your boots, constant, uncomfortable, and sometimes full of things you didn't want to think about. The Lord didn't just want your grain. He wanted your eggs, your wool, your labor, your marriage rights, and, if he could manage it, your dignity. And he'd take them year after year, without ever once asking if you were enjoying the experience. Dawn in the manor's shadow. The rooster isn't crowing yet when you wake, because the rooster knows better than to get up early on egg tithe day. You, however, have no such luxury. It's late April. The thatched roof of your hut drips with the night's dew, and a thin mist hangs over the fields. You step outside barefoot, the cold mud squeezing between your toes, and head toward the chicken coop. The hens glare at you. You glare back. Everyone here knows the game. Half of today's eggs will end up in the manor kitchen before noon. Neighbor Thomas, 6 from me this week. How many for you? You, 7. Thomas, 7? You only have 6 hens. You, guess I'll be buying one from Widow Maud. She charges an ale again. This is the smallest tax you'll pay all year and it still stings. Eggs aren't just food, they're barter, gifts, and emergency income. But a lord's omelet waits for no one. The grain you'll never eat. Grain is the backbone of the manor economy, yours, the Lord's, and the church's. And here's the thing, your own belly is third in line. In England, a typical grain tithe could be 1/10 to 1/3 of your harvest. In northern France, some peasants were known to lose half their grain to tithes and rents. In parts of Eastern Europe under the fallwork system, you didn't just give up grain, you gave up labor days to work the Lord's private fields instead of your own. Bad harvest? Too bad. You still owed the same quota. If your wheat field was thin and patchy this year, you might hand over seed grain you needed for next year. That meant buying extra from neighbors, often at ruinous interest rates, ensuring you started the new year in debt. In one recorded case from Yorkshire in 1315, a steward confiscated a peasant's entire barley crop for falling short on wheat. The man's family survived the winter on thin onion soup. Historians still debate whether such extreme confiscations were the norm or a product of famine years, but to the peasants, it didn't matter. Fear of losing everything was a constant companion. Wool, sheep, and the first fleece. Your sheep are as taxed as you are. In many manors, there was a tradition called the first fleece tax. The Lord got the first and finest wool sheared from your flock each spring. That's the soft, warm stuff that would make a fine cloak for your child, or more likely, a new tunic for the Lord's second cousin. In the wool-rich counties of England, this was no small loss. Wool was money. The great medieval cloth towns, places like Bruges or Ghent, thrived on the English wool trade, and lords knew it. They took their cut before you even finished sharpening the shears. One peasant from Norfolk is recorded in a manor roll as saying, "The Lord wears my warmth while I freeze." The clerk noted this as disrespectful conduct, proof that even your grumbling was taxable in spirit. Marriage now with fees. You'd think marriage would be a happy occasion. In feudal life it was also an invoice. The marchet was a tax paid to your lord for the privilege of marrying. If your daughter married a man from another manor, you paid for the loss of her labor. If she married within the manor, you sometimes still paid, because why not? Marrying outside the manor could be especially expensive. A lord saw it as a direct transfer of economic value to someone else's estate. Widows remarrying often faced negotiated rates, which was a polite way of saying the steward sized you up and charged what he thought he could get. Margaret, your cousin, steward says I owe 2 hens for marrying Peter. You, 2 hens? He doesn't even work fast enough to be worth one. In England, the marchet persisted well into the late Middle Ages. In Eastern Europe, some lords took it further. They required formal consent for a marriage to be legal. No consent, no ceremony, and potentially no legitimate children. When death isn't the end of taxes. Your father dies. The family mourns. You prepare the body, invite the priest, arrange the burial. Then the steward arrives for the harriet, the best beast from your father's possessions, taken as a kind of death duty. The harriet could strip a family of its only plow horse or ox. Without it, you couldn't till your fields effectively, meaning you'd rent an animal from the manor, at a rate the lord set. Was the harriet originally a gift to honor the lord for granting land? Or was it always just opportunistic asset stripping? Historians still argue about it. You don't. You just watch your father's horse being led away, knowing the field work will be twice as hard next year. The strange and stupid taxes. Some lords had a flair for creativity. Chimney tax, charged by the number of chimneys in your house. Poor families bricked theirs up to avoid it, filling their huts with smoke. Ibis tax. In parts of France, lords claimed the first swarm of the year or a portion of your honey. Imagine paying your taxes in jars of bee vomit. A mill ban. You couldn't grind your grain in your own corn without paying. Some lords smashed illicit millstones to enforce the rule. Fishing levy, catching fish without permission? That's a fine, even if the river ran behind your hut. In Poland, there are records of a cabbage tax, where tenants owed a set number of heads each year. No, the lord didn't need that much cabbage, he just sold it in town. A year in taxes. Spring, egg tithe, bee tax, first fleece. Summer, Labor days in the lord's hayfields. Autumn, grain tithe, mill tax, harvest feasts where you do the cooking but don't get to eat much. Winter, repairs to the lord's property, deliveries of firewood, extra dues if you slaughter a pig. It never stops. The manor roll is a carousel of obligation, and you can't get off. Alehouse economics. One winter night, you, Thomas, and Margaret sit in the alehouse. The room smells of smoke and damp wool. Thomas, they say next year there'll be a road toll for carts going to market. Margaret, we'll just carry it on our backs then. You, and they'll invent a back tax. The laughter is bitter, but it's all you've got. Margaret, we'll just carry it on our backs then. You, and they'll invent a back tax. The laughter is bitter, but it's all you've got. The modern comparison. Sure, today you pay income tax, sales tax, maybe property tax. But you can marry who you like without asking your boss. Your boss doesn't take your best laptop when your dad dies. And the state doesn't confiscate your first sweater of the year. Feudal taxes weren't just about money, they were about control. They reminded you every day whose land you lived on, whose rules you followed, and whose table you filled before your own. The system's secret weapon. The genius of the system wasn't just in the taxes themselves, it was in making them seem normal. When you've never known a life without the egg tithe, the marchet, the harriet, the mill tax, the bee tax, and whatever absurd levy the Lord Steward dreams up next, you stop asking why. And that, more than any single obligation, kept the peasants tied to their lords for centuries. If you've been breaking your back all week digging, sowing, and sweating for your lord, Sunday is supposed to be your one day off. The Lord's Day, the priest calls it. Rest, they say. And then they hand you a broom, a bucket, and a list of things to scrub before High Mass. The day of rest that isn't. In medieval Europe, Sundays were legally and religiously protected days of rest, in theory. The third commandment, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy, was taken seriously enough that markets closed, manorial courts didn't meet, and plows sat idle. In practice, that didn't mean peasants lounged in bed. Sunday mornings were dominated by church services, sometimes 2 or 3 hours long, and if it was a feast day, you were expected to help prepare the festivities. That could mean decorating the church with greenery, cooking food for the communal table, or hauling benches out of the parish barn. The mainstream historical fact is clear. In England, France, and much of Central Europe, feast days and Sundays could make up 1/3 to 1/2 of the calendar. A 13th century French peasant might have up to 90 religious holidays a year, plus Sundays. That sounds generous, until you remember that many of those holidays still involved work, just not for your own crops. A Sunday in spring, England, 14th century. It's the first Sunday after Easter, known in your village as Low Sunday. The sky is pale blue, the air full of damp grass smell, and your bones ache from planting barley all week. You had plans to sleep until the church bell rang for prime. Instead, Agnes, your wife, up. The priest says we must bring fresh rushes for the floor. It's the Lord's day. Agnes, exactly. He's the one telling you to get the rushes. You haul a bundle of green rushes into the nave, scattering them across the packed earth floor to cover last month's grime. Children dart between your legs, tying little posies of flowers to the pew ends. The smell of lilies mixes with the tang of damp reeds. Mass begins. The priest chants in Latin. You understand maybe every 10th word, and swings a censer, filling the air with incense thick enough to hide the cobwebs. By the time you stagger home for your day of rest, it's nearly noon. Saints on parade. Feast days for saints were the medieval equivalent of a town-wide festival, with the difference that participation wasn't optional. A mainstream saint like St. Peter or St. Mary. That's a big deal. Banners, processions, bells rung for hours. You might be carrying a relic, perhaps a splinter of wood from the true cross, or a scrap of cloth claimed to be from a martyr's robe, through the muddy streets. In France, these processions could be spectacular. At Chartres, the relic of the Virgin's veil was paraded during droughts to ask for rain. In rural villages, saints' images might be carried into fields to bless crops, or if the weather turned bad, to scold the heavens. The obscure and the odd. Now for the quirky fact. Some saints' feasts were downright bizarre. In certain parts of medieval Poland and Hungary, there was a local devotion to Saint Geinfort, not a canonized saint, but a dog. According to legend, Geinfort had saved a baby from a snake but was mistakenly killed by his master. Villagers honored him with offerings of bread and salt, believing he could protect children from illness. The church condemned the practice, but it lingered for centuries in rural areas. Imagine explaining to your Lord why you skipped extra plowing to attend a dog's feast day. A summer feast, France, 13th century. It's the feast of Saint Martial, patron of Limoges. The air is heavy with the smell of roasting meat, and bright ribbons flap in the warm breeze. You've been assigned to carry a carved wooden statue of the saint from the church to the riverside, where the priest will bless the water. The statue is heavier than it looks, and you're sweating through your tunic. Pierre, next to you, careful, don't drop him. If he wants to be lighter, he can work a miracle. After the blessing, the crowd follows the relic back, singing hymns. Then comes the real work, roasting the lambs donated for the feast, brewing vats of ale, setting up trestle tables. You might get a scrap of meat if you're quick, but most goes to the Lord, the priest, and visiting dignitaries. Work disguised as worship. Why did the church get away with making peasants work on days off? The answer lies in medieval ideas of labor. Physical work for your Lord's profit might be forbidden, but labor for God's glory was a virtue. Sweeping the nave? Holy work. Baking bread for the parish feast? Holy work. Repairing the church roof? Holy work. The trick was that holy work often doubled as maintenance for the Lord's prestige, since local nobles funded and controlled much of the parish life. The great debate, holy days as relief or burden. Some historians argue that the abundance of feast days gave peasants more rest than most pre-industrial laborers. Others counter that the obligations of those days, mass attendance, processions, preparation, erased much of that benefit. Historians still debate the real impact of holy days on medieval peasants' workloads, partly because surviving records emphasize religious observance, not how exhausted people felt after them. Winter, Saints, and Survival, Eastern Europe. In a small Lithuanian village, deep in January snow, it's the feast of St. Anthony the Great. The church is the only warm building for miles, so everyone packs inside. The priest preaches about Anthony's life in the desert while icicles hang from the eaves outside. After Mass, there's the blessing of animals, cows, horses, even the half-frozen geese. You help guide your neighbor's stubborn ox into the churchyard, where it promptly deposits a steaming pile in front of the altar. The priest sighs, sprinkles holy water, and moves on. For peasants, these winter feasts were more than religious duty. They were midwinter social gatherings, a chance to share news, trade goods, and remember you weren't alone in the snow. Relics and rivalries. Relics were serious business. In medieval France and Germany, parishes sometimes competed over who had the most potent saint's remains. A church with a famous relic could attract pilgrims and their offerings. There's a record from the 12th century of two monasteries in Flanders both claiming to have the skull of Saint Jerome. Pilgrims didn't seem to mind, some visited both, hedging their bets. And yes, relics sometimes traveled. If your village was lucky or politically connected, a bishop might loan a relic for a feast day. This meant extra preparation. More garlands, more food, more work for the peasants. The food you make but don't eat. One of the most frustrating parts of feast preparation was cooking for others. You might spend all morning roasting geese in the manor kitchen, basting them with expensive spices like cinnamon or cloves, spices you'd never taste yourself. By the time the dignitaries finished eating, the leftovers were mostly bones and crusts. Sometimes you could snatch a scrap to take home, but only if the steward wasn't watching. Music, misrule, and moments of joy. Not all holy days were drudgery. In some regions, especially during carnival or pre-Lent celebrations, there was licensed misrule. Peasants might dress as lords, parody the clergy, or hold mock trials for animals. In England, the Feast of Fools saw altar boys dress as bishops and deliver humorous sermons. The church tried to suppress such antics, but they persisted in many towns. For peasants, it was a rare sanctioned outlet for humor and rebellion. Sunday evening, the only quiet hour. When the feast was over, the benches put away and the candles snuffed, you might finally have an hour to yourself. Maybe you'd mend a tunic, tell a story by the fire, or just sit in the quiet, letting your shoulders drop. Tomorrow the plow waits. But for now, you've done your duty to God, your parish, and your Lord, all rolled into one exhausting day of rest. Closing thoughts. For medieval peasants, Sundays and Saint Days were a mix of devotion, obligation, and community. They broke the monotony of farm labor but replaced it with another kind of work. One wrapped in incense and hymns instead of mud and manure. They reminded you that you were part of something larger than your field or your hut. But they also reminded you that even on your day off, you still served, if not your Lord, then your Lord. If you are a medieval peasant, you do not work for your Lord, not really. You work for the weather. You plant when the frost leaves. You harvest when the rains pause. You pray when the skies look wrong. And when the hail comes, the frost bites, or the drought bakes your fields, it's the weather, not you, that decides whether you will eat this winter. Your Lord? He still gets his share whether the sky was kind or cruel. A world without insurance. In the 13th and 14th centuries, the vast majority of peasants in England, France, Poland, Bohemia, and elsewhere lived on the knife edge of subsistence. The mainstream historical fact is that medieval farming yields were low, often producing only 2 to 4 times the seed sown. That left little margin for error. One bad storm at the wrong time could turn a promising harvest into moldy straw. No granary of the realm would come to rescue you. The village might have a small communal reserve, but it wouldn't cover an entire bad year. And yet, the Lord's tithe, the church's tithe, and your rent were fixed. They did not shrink when your crop did. A spring that smells wrong, England 1314. It is April and the fields should smell of fresh earth and new grass. Instead, there's a strange wetness in the air, a damp chill that lingers. The old men mutter that the clouds are sitting too low for this time of year. Will, your neighbor, mark me, will have wrought before midsummer. You always say that. Will, and sometimes I'm right. Remember the barley in 12? That year, endless rains flattened the wheat. You spent autumn pulling blackened stalks from the mud. The Lord took his share anyway, weighing the sodden grain with a frown and still writing the same number on his tally. You and your wife thinned your pottage with extra water all winter. The Great Famine reminder. In the years 1315 to 1317, much of northern Europe endured what became known as the Great Famine. Endless rain ruined crops for 3 years. Cattle caught disease in the wet fields. Grain prices tripled. Contemporary chronicles describe people eating dogs, cats, and worse. England's harvest of 1316 was so poor that even the royal household cut its bread rations. But rents and tithes? They still had to be paid. The weather's cruelty did not suspend the rules of feudal obligation. The quirky and the superstitious. Here's the obscure fact. In parts of medieval Germany and Bohemia, villagers practiced weather begging, sending a group of children to walk the fields and sing to the clouds, asking them to hold their rain or share their sun. Sometimes they carried relics, sometimes just a carved wooden rooster. Other customs were stranger still. In the Auvergne region of France, peasants might nail a live toad to a fence post to draw down rain. The church disapproved, but desperation has its own logic. A summer hailstorm, France, 12th century. The wheat is nearly ready when the sky turns black. The air goes suddenly still. Then comes the pounding sound, like stones on a roof. Hail. You run to cover the cabbages with old sacks, but the hailstones are the size of walnuts, shredding leaves and bruising fruit. By the time the storm passes, the fields look as though 1,000 knives have been dragged through them. Pierre, kneeling in the mud, God's judgment. You, then I wish he'd judged the Lord's granary for once. But of course the tithe will still be measured. You will hand over sacks of what little survived, the priest nodding solemnly as if divine justice requires your hunger. Historians still debate. How much control peasants really had over their farming choices remains unclear. Some records suggest they could choose planting dates based on local weather lore. Others imply the Lord's steward dictated the schedule. Historians still debate the degree to which medieval peasants could adapt to local weather patterns versus being bound to fixed feudal timetables, which may have made bad years even worse. Winter's double-edged sword. In England and northern France, a snowy winter could be a blessing. Snow insulated winter wheat and kept the frost from killing roots. But a bare, freezing winter could kill crops outright. Peasants had their signs. A halo around the moon meant snow. A red dawn warned of rain. In Poland, a still night in January was feared as it froze the breath from the soil, a poetic way of saying it killed the ground's moisture. Dialogue, the prayer for weather. At the end of Sunday Mass in an Eastern European village. Priest, let us pray for rain in its season and sun in its season. Old woman in the back, and less wind, Father. Farmer, and no hail. Another farmer, and gentle sun, not like last year. Priest, smiling wearily, we will ask for everything, but the Lord will give what he gives. The modern comparison. Today, if a freak hailstorm wipes out a wheat field in Kansas, there's insurance, federal aid, and maybe a disaster loan. In 14th century Burgundy, your aid was a neighbor lending you a little rye, if they had any to spare. If they didn't, you tightened your belt and prayed for next year. The tax that ignores the sky. The most bitter truth for peasants was that feudal obligations were not weather adjusted. The same happened in Russia's obrok system for later serfs. Payment was fixed regardless of yield. If a storm destroyed half your crop, you had two choices: hand over the same amount of grain and starve, or find another way to pay, sometimes selling tools, animals, or even your children's labor. Floods and faith, England's fenlands. In the fenlands of eastern England, floods were both friend and enemy. They deposited rich silt that made the soil fertile, but too much water could rot the grain. Villagers built low banks of turf to try to control flooding, but one night's storm could undo months of work. Chroniclers tell of 1257, when the Ouse River flooded so badly that entire hamlets were abandoned. The abbey still collected rents from those who had fled. They simply charged the absent rate. The calendar of risk. Every season brought its own threats. A spring, too much rain rotted seeds, too little dried them before they sprouted. Summer, hail, scorching sun, pests. Autumn, Rains at harvest could mold sheaves before they were stored. Or winter, deep cold without snow killed roots. Warm winters encouraged pests to survive. A peasant's mental calendar was full of these hazards, each remembered in Proverbs. A March without rain leaves no bread for the feast. Thunder before May, hunger before Christmas. Obscure medieval weather tax. In certain alpine valleys, there was a curious storm tithe. If a storm destroyed the Lord's hay or fruit trees, peasants owed an extra day's labor to replace it. This was on top of their own losses. It sounds absurd, but it reflects the worldview. Nature's whims were part of God's order, but man's obligations were part of the Lord's. When prayers failed, drought in Castile 15th century. In 1423, a severe drought hit Castile. Chronicles describe processions carrying statues of the Virgin into the countryside, singing litanies for rain. When rain didn't come, some towns held rogation fasts, eating only bread and water until the skies changed. For peasants, this meant working the fields hungry, under a blazing sun, waiting for clouds that never came. Weather memory. Peasants remembered weather years like we remember wars. The year of the black frost or the summer of the drowned hay became markers for births, marriages, and deaths. An English farmer might say, "I was wed the year the frost killed the hops." In a world without meteorological records, the body and the belly were the archives. The final joke. The ultimate cruelty of weather was its indifference. Your Lord cared about his rents, your priest about your tithes, and the sky about nothing. The clouds didn't know your name. The frost didn't spare your barley because your wife was sick. The hail didn't veer because you had worked hard. You could pray, sing, nail toads to fence posts, or carry relics through the mud. Sometimes it worked, or seemed to. Sometimes it didn't. And you learned to bow to your true master, the weather. You never really lived alone. Your humble hut, barely taller than your shoulder, shelters more than just your tired body and your meager belongings. The creaking wooden beams above you are a stage for a nightly circus of scurrying legs and tiny claws. The animals you tend, cows, pigs, chickens, sometimes share your space, but they aren't the real problem. No, your roommates are the ones you don't see but certainly feel. Rats, mice, fleas, and every other kind of creepy, crawly pest the medieval world could muster. The cold reality of medieval housing. Your home is a simple affair. Walls made of wattle and daub, a roof of thatch, and a dirt floor that turns to mud with every rain. Inside, your family shares a single room, and often animals are housed in an attached stall or even the same room during winter. It's not just about warmth, it's about survival. But all this invites trouble. Vermin find your hut a perfect nesting ground. Rats and mice run wild, feasting on the scraps you try to keep safe and nibbling on grain sacks stored precariously in the corner. You hear their tiny feet at night, that patter like the softest rain on a window pane, but multiplied 100 times, coming from every direction. A mainstream historical fact. Rodents were everywhere. The medieval period was, as historians say bluntly, infested. Rats and mice thrived in towns and countryside alike. They weren't just nuisances but carriers of deadly diseases. The Black Death, which devastated Europe in the 14th century, famously spread via fleas that infested these rodents. Your hut, with its damp straw bedding and open windows, is a perfect flea hotel. Fleas jump on your legs and arms, feasting on your blood while you try to sleep. You scratch until your skin is raw. In some places, fleas were so bad they became part of everyday life, like a constant, itchy soundtrack. The quirky and unusual, heated stones and roasted fleas. Here's an odd historical tidbit. In winter, some peasants placed heated stones under their straw bedding to stay warm. The theory was the stones would radiate heat, keeping the cold at bay. But historians still debate whether this was actually a cozy trick or just a medieval way to roast your fleas and make them jump away, temporarily at least. Imagine you're curled up in your bedroll, half asleep, feeling the warmth of a stone, but also sensing the microscopic flea party erupting beneath you. Living with animals, not just for warmth. Your cow or pig isn't just livestock, it's also part of your home. The animals help heat the hut in winter, but they also bring their own set of roommates, mites, ticks, and other parasites. Sometimes the smell is overwhelming, mixing manure and sweat into an odor so pungent it makes your eyes water. On a cold night, the animal's breath fogs the room, mingling with your own, while rats dart between their legs. You hear snuffling and the occasional squeak, a reminder that you share your small space with countless tiny lives. Daily life with pests, the dance of survival. During the day, you sweep the floor as best you can with a bundle of twigs. You try to keep your bedding clean, straw tick stuffed with dried grass, layered with coarse wool. But it's a losing battle. Fleas and lice find new homes in your clothes, your hair, your beard. You pick at them absently, knowing they'll come back as soon as you look away. Neighbor Joan, did you ever try using wormwood? My granny swears it keeps the fleas off. And here I thought rubbing myself with mud was the latest fashion. Some remedies worked better than others, but all were temporary. Bathing was rare, water precious, and soap nearly unknown in villages. Personal hygiene was a challenge. Fleas and lice thrived in this environment. Rats and rodents, more than just pests. Rats and mice didn't just eat your food, they threatened your very survival. Not only were they disease carriers, but they destroyed seed stores vital for planting. Imagine the heartbreak of opening a granary only to find your precious rye gnawed through and useless. The medieval rat population is believed to have exploded in the wake of growing towns and villages, which provided ample food and shelter. You, living on the edge of a forest clearing, deal with a constant influx from nearby wild areas. Rats can swim, climb, and even gnaw through wood. The Fleas Party and the Black Death. The Black Death's arrival in the mid-14th century was a tragedy made possible by the tiny fleas living on rats. Your ancestors wouldn't have understood Yersinia pestis or germ theory, but they knew something was terribly wrong when bodies piled up and neighbors vanished. You can hear scholars argue over the exact role fleas played. Did the disease spread mostly through flea bites, or was airborne transmission more important? Historians still debate how the plague traveled so rapidly and how much rats contributed versus other vectors. A night with roommates. Imagine the hut at night. Your wife's soft breathing beside you. The low grunt of your pig in the corner. The occasional rustle of straw as mice sneak past. Then the unmistakable, maddening tickle of flea bites, tiny pincushions on your skin. You try to swat at the invisible tormentors, but it's hopeless. The fleas outnumber you. How did people cope? Medieval people used a variety of strategies. Herbs like wormwood, lavender, and tansy were stuffed in bedding or hung from rafters, believed to repel pests. Smoke from burning herbs was used in fumigation rituals. But with no real understanding of the parasite's biology, these were more superstition than cure. Washing was done only occasionally. Peasants prized their hard-won body heat and feared cold baths. Clothes were patched and patched, but rarely cleaned in water, allowing lice to thrive. A curious fact, the cat's role. Cats were more than pets, they were pest controllers. A village cat earned its keep by hunting mice and rats. But some peasants feared cats, associating them with witchcraft, so their numbers were sometimes low, allowing rodents to flourish unchecked. A rural chronicler from 15th century Bohemia wrote of a rat plague, so severe it forced villagers to adopt cats en masse. Unfortunately, cats couldn't save everyone. Social dynamics, you and your pest-filled neighbors. You talk with your neighbors about vermin as you trade stories by the fire. Old Tomas, last winter the fleas were so bad I thought they were dancing on my skin. Marta, my boy's legs were covered in bites but they never complain. Hard life. You, at least they don't charge rent. Despite the misery there's humor. The shared torment becomes a strange kind of camaraderie. The debate over medieval hygiene. Historians continue to debate how dirty medieval peasants really were. Some argue that their heavy use of herbs, occasional baths, and communal washing suggest a degree of cleanliness not often credited. Others point to the widespread presence of lice and fleas as evidence that hygiene was poor by modern standards. Historians still debate the extent of medieval hygiene practices and their impact on health. Your flea-ridden clothes. Your tunic is patched with mismatched scraps. You wear it year-round, washed rarely. Lice find plenty of places to hide in its folds. You have no better clothes, no fashion to speak of, just survival. Some villages had a tradition of annual clothes cleaning days, where garments were aired out, beaten with sticks, and dipped in herbal concoctions. You look forward to this day like a holiday. Rodents and fire, the last defense. To combat rats, peasants sometimes set small traps made of wood or bone. Fires were used to smoke out hiding rodents, but risked burning the thatch roofs. One night, your neighbor accidentally set fire to his own barn trying to fumigate it. The entire village pitched in to put it out, cursing both the rats and the reckless fumigator. The modern perspective. Today you have pesticides, vacuum cleaners, and running water. Back then you had prayers, herbal smoke, and sheer grit. The pests you lived with were as much a part of your world as the crops and animals. Closing thoughts. Living with rats, fleas, and all manner of tiny invaders was just part of medieval life. Your hut was a community of species, some friendly, most not. You learned to live with the itch, the rustle, and the quiet company of your unwanted roommates. And when the plague came, it wasn't just the weather or the Lord you feared. It was the tiny creatures sharing your bed. You've been working dawn to dusk, under the ever-watchful eye of your Lord's steward, your hands raw from the cold soil, your feet blistered by the mud. Your world might seem small, a patch of dirt and a cramped hut, but it's alive, buzzing with the chatter and laughter that only village life can produce. When the sun lowers and the fields quiet, that's when the real show begins. The village gossip, the whispered rumors, the small joys and escapes that make this harsh life a little more bearable. The village, a living tapestry of stories. You might think the medieval village is just a sleepy collection of huts, but it's more like a buzzing beehive. Everyone knows everyone else's business, sometimes before you even know it yourself. The local blacksmith spat with his wife, the miller's secret trip to town, who's courting whom, or what scandalous thing the priest said in the last sermon. Gossip isn't just entertainment, it's the social glue, the way information travels faster than any messenger or letter could. When you can't read or write, words, spoken, repeated, and exaggerated, are power. A mainstream historical fact: the importance of oral culture. The medieval world was mostly illiterate. Estimates suggest only about 10% of Europeans could read, and even fewer peasants. So stories, news, and knowledge passed orally. The village gathering, the market, the churchyard after mass, or the alehouse, was where you learned about everything from the latest tax demands to tales from the Crusades. Your life's small pleasures often hinge on these moments. You lean in, catching snippets between bites of dry bread or sips of weak ale, filling your mind with a world beyond the fields. Market day, mini holiday. Every now and then the Lord grants a market day or a fair. This is like a mini vacation. Your day's work gets cut short and you put on your best patched clothes. Maybe you even find a copper coin slipped under the mattress for a rare treat. The market is a sensory overload. The scent of fresh herbs and roasted meats, the shouts of hawkers selling cloth, spices, and trinkets, the clatter of hooves and wagons. For one day you walk among strangers, hear stories from other villages, maybe spot a traveling minstrel or a fortune teller. The quirky fact: the gossip seat in some villages. In parts of England and France, there was a curious tradition: the gossip seat. A special bench near the church or the market where the village chatterers congregated after services. Sitting there was both a privilege and a public announcement that you were in the know, but also a target for quick wit and teasing. Imagine yourself plopping down on that bench, ready to spread a juicy tidbit about the baker's new wife or the blacksmith's drunken mishap. But beware, gossip is a two-edged sword. Conversations that shape your day. You bump into your neighbor Alice at the well. "Alice, did you hear? Old Roger's daughter is with child, but no one knows who the father is." "Oh, you don't say. The miller perhaps." "Alice, that's what I heard. But the miller's got a wife." "Well, it's not like fidelity runs deep in these parts." This small exchange fills your day with intrigue and laughter. It's not just idle talk, it's your way of connecting, of feeling part of a living, breathing community. Rare tidbit: the role of storytelling competitions. In some regions, especially in Ireland and Scotland, villages held storytelling contests during fairs. Storytellers, often the village elders or traveling bards, would compete by spinning tales of heroes, ghosts, and gods. Winning brought prestige and sometimes gifts from the Lord. You might not be the bard, but you enjoy listening, your imagination carried far from the muddy fields to enchanted forests and distant castles. The scholars debate. One fascinating question remains: how reliable was oral gossip? Some historians argue that village gossip kept communities tight and informed, acting as a form of social regulation. Others warn it also spread misinformation, creating feuds and false accusations. Historians still debate whether medieval gossip helped or harmed village life more, and how it influenced justice and community bonds. Small escapes, Sunday Mass and festivals. Your day off is Sunday, but that doesn't mean rest. The church service is a communal event, a chance to see people you don't work with daily, to hear the priest's sermons that mix scripture with local tales and warnings. The festivals, like Easter, Michaelmas and Christmas, bring music, dancing and the rare luxury of a shared meal with friends and family. It's also when gossip swells, stories growing taller with each retelling over mugs of ale. The market's strange delights. You spot odd things at the market. Dried toads, supposed to cure warts, small bottles of snake oil remedies, and sometimes exotic spices like pepper or cinnamon, treasures from faraway lands. The sight of colorful fabrics and carved wooden toys delights the children. You might buy a small loaf of sweet bread or a shiny pebble for your child. Tiny joys that feel like a world away from the toil. Dialogue, the market day experience. At the market you overhear. Vendor, fresh ginger from the east. Perfect for your winter cough. Customer, last time I bought from you, I nearly lost my teeth. Vendor, laughing, only the ones that needed losing. You chuckle and think, at least some things never change. Shady salesmen and skeptical buyers. The escape of story and humor. You trade jokes with friends. Humor is survival. When the Lord raises taxes again or the harvest looks poor, a good laugh can ease the weight. The tales grow more elaborate. The drunken miller who fell into the river, the priest caught snoring during Mass, the blacksmith's apprentice who tried to forge a horseshoe upside down. The role of alehouses and taverns. In larger villages you might find a tavern, a smoky, noisy place where the day's worries melt under flagons of ale. You listen to tales from travelers and merchants. Sometimes an official from the Lord's court comes to collect dues, and the atmosphere tenses. Still, these places offer a rare taste of freedom. You can vent, laugh, and forget your burdens for a while. Quirky detail, the bride cake tradition. Before weddings, the village often held a bride cake event. A noisy, messy celebration where everyone shared food, drank, and told stories about the couple's past. The bride might be teased mercilessly, but it bonded the community. Even your Lord's permission to marry feels less like a strict command and more like a village-wide festival, if only briefly. The modern parallel. Think of gossip and market days as your medieval Netflix and social media. Without phones or TV, you depend on face-to-face chatter, storytelling, and festivals to unwind and feel connected. And unlike modern social media, you can't just block the annoying neighbor, you have to live with them. Closing thoughts. Your life is full of dirt, toil, and hardship. But it's also alive with stories, laughter, and the small escapes that give meaning to each hard day. Gossip isn't just chatter. It's your way of sharing the weight of life, bonding with your neighbors, and dreaming beyond the fields. Even in the darkest times, there is always a tale waiting to be told, a joke to be shared, and a moment of joy in a simple market day. You are halfway through hoeing your small patch of barley when a shadow falls over the field. It's not a cloud, it's Thomas, the steward's son, puffing from the run. His tunic is dusted with the yellow road dirt, his hair dripping with sweat. The Lord calls for all hands. Drop what you're doing. Now. That's it. No explanation. No please. No promise of pay. One moment you're in your field, trying to coax grain from stubborn soil, the next you're part of some grand project you neither asked for nor wanted. The unstoppable command. When the Lord calls, it doesn't matter if you're halfway through sowing seed, mending a roof, or tending a sick child. You are bound by corvée labor, the duty to work on the Lord's projects without pay, simply because you owe him service in exchange for the land you farm. This could mean repairing his mill, hauling stones for a new tower, or digging drainage ditches to improve his fields, not yours. A mainstream historical fact. In much of medieval Europe, especially in France and England, corvée labor was a legal obligation tied to serfdom. Records from the Domesday Book, 1086, show English peasants working several days a week on their lord's land or projects, in addition to tending their own strips. In France, this persisted for centuries, with peasants sometimes forced to maintain roads for royal messengers. Scene 1. The bridge that ate your summer. It's midsummer, and the Lord decides a new bridge will benefit everyone. By everyone, he means himself, so his knights can cross the river faster on their way to hunt or collect taxes. You and the other villagers are rounded up before dawn. The air is damp, the mist rising from the river. You can smell wet earth, rotting reeds, and the sour tang of sweat from the crowd. Your bare feet sink into the muddy bank as you haul massive logs into place, your shoulders aching from the weight. The carpenters shout instructions you barely understand, and every time you pause to catch your breath, the steward barks, "Keep moving." The Lord rides by at sunset to see the progress. By the time the sun dips low, your hands are blistered raw, your back feels like a cartwheel axle, and the bridge is only halfway done. The Lord rides past, nodding once, and disappears without a word of thanks. You trudge home in silence, wondering if your barley will survive without tending. The quirky fact: bridge building as a sin tax. In some regions, particularly parts of France and the Low Countries, the church declared bridge building a pious act that could reduce your time in purgatory. Priests preached that helping with such projects would shorten the soul's journey to heaven. This convenient theology meant lords could frame their demands as spiritually beneficial, making refusal not just disobedience but borderline heresy. Scene 2. The ditch that wouldn't end. In autumn you're summoned again, this time to dig a drainage ditch across the Lord's meadow. The wind is sharp and the ground is half frozen. Your breath clouds the air as your spade clinks against stones hidden beneath the sod. Every strike sends shocks up your arms. Beside you Matthew mutters, "I'd rather dig my own grave, at least I'd be done sooner." You stifle a laugh, knowing the steward's ears are everywhere. The work stretches for weeks. Your boots rot in the mud, your knees ache, and you start dreaming of ditches in your sleep. When it's finally finished, the Lord's pasture drains beautifully, while your own plot remains a swamp after every rain. Scene 3. The call to arms. Sometimes the Lord's call is not for a ditch or a bridge, but for war. This is the most dreaded summons. If your lord is a vassal to a greater lord, or worse, a king, he may be required to provide soldiers. That means you, even if your idea of combat is chasing a runaway goose. The steward hands you a spear that's taller than your cottage and says, "Hold the pointy end toward the enemy." Your armor is a padded coat that smells like wet dog. The march is long, the food is bad, and the pay is non-existent. A mainstream historical fact. In feudal Europe, peasants were rarely the primary fighting force. That was the job of trained knights. But they were often conscripted as foot soldiers or laborers in military campaigns. English records from the Hundred Years' War show levies of hundreds of peasants pressed into service to dig trenches, build fortifications, or haul supplies. Dialogue: at the edge of the battlefield. John, do you think we'll see the enemy? You, I hope not. I'd rather my head stay on my shoulders. John, if I die, tell Margaret I loved her. You, tell her yourself, you fool. A trumpet sounds in the distance and your stomach turns to ice. The Lord rides past, his armor gleaming, his horse a mountain of muscle. You grip your spear tighter and pray you'll live to complain about this day in the alehouse. Rare tidbit: the ox tax for war. In some Eastern European territories, lords demanded an ox tax. If a peasant was called to war but couldn't fight, due to age, injury, or cowardice, they had to provide an ox for transport instead. This could ruin a family, as an ox was worth more than a year's harvest. Historians debate. Some historians argue that corvée labor and wartime levies were essential for maintaining infrastructure and defense in a world without standing armies or state-funded projects. Others contend these demands were an exploitation of peasant labor, enriching lords while leaving peasants vulnerable to famine and ruin. Historians still debate the balance between necessity and oppression in these medieval obligations. The Lord's emergencies. Not all calls are noble. Sometimes you're summoned to help dig a fish pond, plant an orchard, or carry stones to improve the view from the Lord's manor. These are presented as for the good of the estate, but you know full well whose table those fish will land on. Scene: the orchard day. Spring, the air smells of blossoms and turned soil. You're knee-deep in a trench, planting apple saplings in neat rows. The Lord strolls by, hands behind his back, saying, "Fine work, fine work. In a few years, these will be the pride of my table." You mutter under your breath, "And my stomach will still be empty." The toll on your own land. Every day you spend building, digging, or fighting for the Lord is a day you can't tend your own fields. Crops go unweeded, roofs leak, livestock stray. In bad years, these absences can mean the difference between a lean winter and starvation. Yet refusal is not an option. The penalties range from fines, which you can't afford, to the confiscation of your land or worse. The alehouse aftermath. When the project ends, you and your neighbors gather at the alehouse, sore and exhausted. Matthew, remember the bridge? Took us all summer. Last week the river flooded and washed half of it away. You, maybe the Lord will call us again, we can build it twice as strong for twice the blisters. Alice, at least we're still here to complain. The laughter is tired but real. Surviving the Lord's demands is a badge of honor, even if it comes at your expense. Modern parallel. If you think this sounds like an ancient nightmare, consider jury duty, military drafts, or mandatory community service in some countries. Modern life still has its Lord's calls, though you're more likely to get a letter than a sweaty steward. Closing reflection. The Lord's call is a reminder that in medieval life, your time was never truly your own. The land you worked, the house you slept in, the food you grew, all of it came with strings attached, strings the Lord could tug at will. Whether building a bridge, digging a ditch, or holding a spear, you answered the call not because you wanted to, but because you had to. And somehow, through the blisters, mud, and fear, you carried on. Because in this world, survival meant showing up no matter what the Lord demanded. It starts innocently enough. You meet her at the midsummer market, the girl from the next village. She's carrying a basket of onions, you're pretending to browse chickens you can't afford. She laughs at your terrible joke about geese. You think this is it? But in the medieval countryside, this is it isn't just a matter of shared glances and daring hand brushes. It's a matter of permission, paperwork, or its medieval equivalent, and sometimes payment. You walk her back toward her village talking about the weather because that actually matters here, and joking about the Lord's clumsy hunting dogs. You can feel her fingers twitch near yours, almost touching. Then she says quietly, "My father says I'm to marry a man in our village. The Lord has already given his blessing." Your stomach drops. You didn't even know the Lord's blessing was part of the process. It is. In fact, in some regions it's more than a blessing, it's a requirement. In feudal Europe, many serfs needed their lord's permission to marry, especially if the marriage would move one of them to a different manor. This was not just about romance, it was about economics. If a woman married a man from another manor, her labor, and future children's labor, went to that other lord, reducing the workforce on her original lord's land. The fee to marry outside your manor was called a merchet in England. You go to your lord's steward to ask permission. His house smells of ink, wax, and yesterday's cabbage stew. You stand awkwardly by the door while he looks over a ledger. Steward, "So, you wish to marry a girl from Hartford?" You, "Yes, sir." Steward, "That will be 3 hens and 2 days' labor in the Lord's orchard." You, "For getting married?" Steward, "For taking a valuable worker from another lord. Consider it compensation." You hand over the hens and wonder if love is worth poultry and blisters. In some areas of medieval France and Germany, the lord, or his steward, collected a small fee known as a bedding tax, payable on your wedding night. Officially, it was a household startup fee. Unofficially, it was one more excuse to squeeze money from peasants. Historians suspect the fee's timing was more for convenience than symbolism, but in the popular imagination it became linked to the most private part of marriage. Not everyone found love at random. The market was often a social event as much as an economic one, and older women, sometimes widows with a knack for gossip, played informal matchmaker. You're at the grain stalls when Widow Agnes leans in. Agnes, I saw you talking to Margaret from Harford. She's a good worker and her mother keeps a clean hearth. But you'll need to move fast. Thomas the miller's son is already sniffing around. Does Thomas have the Lord's favor? Agnes, he has his father's mill. Same thing. Some historians argue that lords rarely interfered in marriages unless property or labor was at stake, seeing most unions as too minor to bother with. Others contend that control over marriages was a way to reinforce feudal authority and keep communities stable, or profitable. Historians still debate how often lords actually blocked marriages versus simply collecting fees. Sometimes the problem isn't the lord, it's the church. You and your sweetheart are distant cousins, in a world where distant can mean your great-grandparents might have been siblings. The priest frowns when you announce your intentions. Priest, this is within the prohibited degrees of consanguinity. I have no idea what that means. Priest, you share too much blood. We've never even shared an ale. Getting a dispensation is expensive and slow, so many couples simply marry quietly and hope no one notices. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it leads to annulment years later, and the heartbreak of children declared illegitimate. In late medieval England, some villages held love days, community gatherings meant to resolve disputes and encourage social harmony. Ironically, they were also prime opportunities for matchmaking. The idea was that if neighbors settled their quarrels, they'd be more inclined to support each other's alliances, including marriages. You've probably heard of the droit du seigneur, the supposed right of a lord to sleep with a new bride on her wedding night. Modern historians largely agree this was a myth or exaggerated slander used to paint feudal lords as tyrants. However, the fees and permissions surrounding marriage were very real. Still, the story persists, and in the alehouse Matthew insists. Matthew, old Lord William tried it once, but Lady Margaret chased him off with a candlestick. That didn't happen. Matthew, maybe not, but it should have. Romance wasn't all moonlight and longing stares. Marriage was a survival strategy, a way to combine resources, labor, and protection. A good marriage could mean more fields to work, more hands to help, and more security in old age. If you married without permission and your lord found out, you might face fines, lose your land, or be ordered to separate. The stakes were high and so was the gossip. John, she's from Harford, eh? Careful, they say the girls there have strong arms and stronger opinions. That's why I like her. John, then you'd better save up your hens. The ale tastes sour, the fire is low, but for a moment you feel a flicker of hope. Today, marriage is mostly about personal choice and maybe a marriage license. Imagine if you had to pay your local government in chickens to wed someone from a different town, and if they could simply say no. On the bright side, at least you don't have to explain your love life to a feudal steward with cabbage breath. Love in the medieval village wasn't just complicated by shyness, distance, or parental disapproval. It was entangled in a web of feudal rights, church laws, and economic calculations. A glance across the market could set your heart racing, but turning that glance into a life together required navigating permissions, fees, and the whims of both the lord and the priest. And yet, against the odds, people found ways. They bargained, they paid, they risked fines. They met in fields, whispered in the shadows, and sometimes even defied the rules entirely. Because no matter how many strings the system tried to pull, the human heart has always had a way of slipping the knot. It starts with a cough. Not yours at first, it's the old man 2 cottages down, the one with the bent back who always smells faintly of onions no matter the season. You hear it in the morning when you're hauling yourself out of bed, that raspy, wet sound cutting through the stillness of dawn. In any other world you might dismiss it as nothing, just a bit of phlegm after the chill night air. But here in your village in this century, a cough is a harbinger. A whisper of something moving through the air, something you can't see, can't dodge, can't bargain with. The air inside your own cottage is thick, sour with the scent of damp wool, stale straw, and the faint ammonia tang of last night's piss pot. The hearth is cold. You can see your breath. You tug the rough wool blanket around your shoulders, feeling its familiar itch. If this were a fine day, your first thoughts would be about bread, about tools, about getting into the fields before the Lord's reeve passes by. Today though, your mind hooks on that cough. It has a rhythm to it now. You heard it again last night. And you know how this goes. First one cough, then 3, then 10. Then you wake up one morning and the whole street sounds like a flock of sick geese. It's not like you can go tell anyone important. There's no village doctor waiting in a clean white room, no little bottle of pills. In your world, medicine is more of an improvised theater, part herbs, part hope, and part sheer stubbornness. If you're lucky, someone's granny knows a tea that will loosen the lungs, a mash of thyme or wild rosemary steeped in boiling water until the steam clears your head. If you're unlucky, the cure involves something like hanging a dead toad around your neck because, as the local wise woman explains, the spirit of the toad frightens away the spirit of the fever. You don't question it too much. People around here swear by worse. You tell yourself it's probably just the damp. Everyone blames the damp for everything. Rheumatism, melancholy, bread going moldy in less than a day. But a part of you remembers the last time the damp brought something else. The winter 3 years back when it began the same way. That time it was your cousin who went first, the one with the quick laugh who could dig twice as fast as anyone else. He'd been out in the fields in a drizzle, came home with a sniffle, and by the next market day he couldn't get out of bed. The priest came, murmured Latin over him, and left. By the time the priest returned, it was to bury him. There is a strange inevitability to sickness in your world. When a cough starts making its rounds, you know the odds are stacked. Medieval villages are perfect playgrounds for illness. One-room houses, shared sleeping pallets, and livestock living practically on top of you. The pigs don't care that they're coughing too. The chickens cluck as if nothing's wrong. The rats never stop moving. You try not to think about the rats because you've heard enough whispers about them and the plagues they carry. Though truth be told, nobody here actually understands what a plague is beyond lots of people dying very fast. What you do know is this: when people get sick, life slows down and speeds up all at once. Slows because the fields are half empty and the work is left undone. Speeds because funerals come quicker and gossip spreads faster than the illness itself. There's always someone who swears they saw a bad omen the week before it began. A crow circling over the church roof, a strange light in the woods, a child born with a mark on its face. Your neighbor Agnes is already muttering about the saints being angry. She's lighting candles at her doorway, one for Saint Roch, the patron saint against plague, and another for Saint Sebastian, also plague-related because you can't have too much insurance. The local priest encourages this, though you suspect it's also because he gets the leftover wax stubs, which are handy in the long winter evenings. This is where the village healer enters the picture. She's not an official anything, just an older woman with an intimidating stare and a headscarf perpetually smelling of dried lavender. She insists she can read illness in your pulse, which means she holds your wrist for a moment, nods, and then prescribes something. Sometimes it's a bundle of herbs. Sometimes it's stranger. One of her more infamous remedies last year involved stuffing your pillow with dried cow dung to draw out the sickness. You didn't try it yourself, but your uncle swore it worked for him, though to be fair, he also swore he once saw a fairy in the barley field. Here's the mainstream historical truth about it all. Most medieval medicine in rural Europe was a blend of surviving Greco-Roman theory, local herbal knowledge, and heavy doses of religion. Illness was thought to be caused by an imbalance in the body's humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. The cure therefore often involved balancing them, which could mean bloodletting, purging, or changing your diet, not that your diet ever varied much. The idea of invisible germs was centuries away. And here's the odd little-known fact. In some parts of medieval Eastern Europe, there was a belief that certain illnesses could be prevented by wearing a necklace of bread. Yes, actual bread, sometimes shaped into tiny rolls or twists, threaded together with string. It was thought that the bread would absorb the sickness before it reached your body. Whether it worked is anyone's guess. Historians still debate whether this was a purely symbolic act of protection or whether people genuinely believed the bread physically caught the illness like a sponge. The day wears on. The cough seems to echo more often across the muddy lanes. You hear it from the smithy, from the group of children chasing a rag ball. The baker's boy has a red nose and keeps wiping it on his sleeve. You feel the little pang in your chest, not sickness, not yet, but the ache of inevitability. If it's going around, you're probably going to get it. And when you do, it's a coin toss whether you'll be back in the fields in a week or in the ground by next Sunday. You think of the saints again, but also of the other remedies floating around the village. Someone swears by onion syrup. Someone else is boiling vinegar in a pot to cleanse the air. The tanner says you should hang a cut onion in the doorway because the bad air sticks to it. A shepherd claims you must sleep with your head facing east, so the illness rolls out with the sunrise. You nod politely. You've learned not to laugh at these things. Not because you believe them all, but because in a place like this, hope is as valuable as bread, and mocking someone's hope feels like spitting in the well. Night comes. The coughing doesn't stop. It grows louder as though darkness gives it permission to roam. You lie in your bed listening. The straw beneath you rustles with tiny movements, probably mice, possibly worse. You pull the blanket over your head and breathe the musty air, warm and stale but comforting in its own way. Tomorrow you'll check on the old man. Maybe bring him some broth if you can spare it. You tell yourself that you're strong, that you've survived worse winters, worse sicknesses. Still, in the quiet, you can't help but feel the weight of something unseen pressing on the village, moving through the air like a rumor you can't stop. You wake to the muffled toll of the church bell before dawn, a sound as familiar and inescapable as the cold stone walls of your cottage. It echoes through the village, stretching across fields and over muddy lanes, pulling even the deepest sleepers from their uneasy rest. The church's voice has always been there, a constant in your life, as inevitable as the sun's rise, as unavoidable as the Lord's demands or the season's cruel whims. Today is no different. As you pull on your threadbare cloak and step outside, the air is thick with mist, clinging to your skin like the church's invisible hand, guiding your every step, your every thought, your very soul. It's the church that sets the rhythm of your days, the marker of your years. The first light signals morning prayers, the slow turning of the calendar dictates fast days and feast days, penance and celebration. Your life, it seems, belongs as much to the church as it does to your Lord. You glance toward the spire, its silhouette sharp against the gray dawn. The priest's candlelight flickers in the window of the small stone church, and soon the village will gather there. Women clutch their children, men leave their work unfinished, all drawn together beneath the church's watchful eye. It's not just a building, it's a command center for your soul. Living under the church's rule means more than attending Mass every Sunday. It means surrendering your body and spirit to a set of rules and beliefs that govern everything from how you dress, to when and whom you marry, even to the thoughts you're allowed to entertain. The church dictates what is holy and what is sinful, what is salvation and what is damnation. It shapes the very fabric of your community, weaving a tapestry of moral codes and rituals that leave little room for doubt. You remember the time when your neighbor, old Thomas, was chastised by the priest for letting his son marry a girl from a neighboring village without the church's blessing. The wedding was quiet, a simple affair with a handful of witnesses, but to the church it was an act of defiance, a breach of order. The priest came knocking, his voice stern as he reminded Thomas that marriages outside the church's approval could condemn souls to eternal punishment. The family's fields went unplowed for weeks, the community's support waned, and whispers followed them like shadows. The church's grip was invisible but ironclad. This control extended far beyond marriage. The church was the arbiter of knowledge, the keeper of law, and the moral compass for all. It prescribed how to mourn, how to celebrate, how to pray, and how to confess sins. Confession was more than just a personal moment. It was a ritual where your darkest thoughts were laid bare to the priest's scrutinizing gaze. You never knew if he would report something or simply withhold absolution, leaving you burdened with guilt and fear. Your own childhood is marked by moments shaped by the church's teachings. You recall the first time you were taught about the 7 deadly sins, a list that haunted your dreams more than the occasional nightmares about the Lord's punishments. Pride, greed, lust, envy, gluttony, wrath, and sloth, each a doorway to eternal damnation. Even the most trivial of your youthful impulses felt like a step toward the fiery pits of hell. It was a tightrope walk between natural human desires and the ever-present fear of spiritual ruin. The church's authority was cemented through spectacle as well. Festivals celebrated saints' days with parades, masses, and feasting, but these were not merely joyous occasions. They were reminders of the church's central place in village life, occasions where the priest's voice thundered in sermons that urged obedience and humility. The Feast of Corpus Christi, for example, brought the whole community into the streets to witness the Eucharist procession, a display of sacred power meant to inspire awe and reinforce the church's role as mediator between heaven and earth. Yet the church's reach was not only spiritual but also practical. The local monastery owned vast tracts of land, controlled mills, and collected tithes, a tenth of every villager's harvest. This meant that while you toiled for your Lord, you also owed a share of your earnings to the church. Failure to pay could mean excommunication, a social death sentence that isolated you from the community and the sacraments that promised salvation. There were, of course, strange and fascinating practices mixed into this web of control. You've heard tales about how some priests would bless animals to protect crops, or how holy water was sprinkled not just on people but on doorways and even on weapons before battle. On rare occasions, you might witness the ritual of exorcism, a dramatic ceremony filled with chants and holy symbols aimed at casting out evil spirits. To the untrained eye, it could seem more theater than religion, but to the faithful, it was a powerful assertion of divine authority over the unknown. One of the more peculiar practices involved relics, the bones, clothing, or personal effects of saints, that were believed to hold miraculous powers. Villagers from miles around would make pilgrimages to see these holy objects, hoping for healing or protection. Some relics were said to cure blindness, others to ensure fertility or safe childbirth. Of course, many priests would charge for the privilege of viewing or touching these items, turning faith into a source of income. Historians have debated whether the trade in relics was a genuine expression of devotion or a cynical exploitation of popular belief. This remains a topic of contention even today. The church also wielded control through its censorship of knowledge and thought. Books were rare, precious, and mostly in Latin, a language you and most villagers could not read. The priest was the sole interpreter of Scripture, deciding what was true doctrine and what was heresy. Deviating from the church's teachings was dangerous, often punishable by harsh penalties. The fear of heresy kept many in line, ensuring conformity and obedience. Perhaps the most intimate and intrusive aspect of the church's watchfulness was its involvement in your thoughts and intentions. The concept of the examination of conscience meant that you were expected to scrutinize your every desire and action, looking for signs of sin lurking in your heart. This self-policing was reinforced by the ever-present threat of confession and penance, turning morality into a private but constant burden. Yet, despite this heavy control, the church was also a source of comfort and community. The rituals, the festivals, the shared prayers, these gave shape to your life, a rhythm in an otherwise chaotic world. In times of hardship, you found solace in the belief that suffering had meaning, that there was hope beyond the trials of this life. Historians continue to debate the precise extent of the church's control over daily life in medieval villages. Some argue that the church was an oppressive force that dominated every aspect of existence, stifling personal freedom and fostering fear. Others suggest that villagers found ways to negotiate, resist, and even reinterpret religious practices, creating a more complex and nuanced relationship with the church than simple submission. The truth, as always, lies somewhere in between. In the quiet moments before sleep, as you lay beneath your thin blanket, you sometimes wonder how different life might be without the church's watchful eye. Would you be freer? Happier? Or would the village fall into chaos without its guiding hand? You can never quite decide, for the church is as much a part of your world as the soil beneath your feet and the sky above your head. Tonight, the bell tolls again, a reminder that the church's gaze never falters. You breathe deeply, feeling the weight of centuries pressing down, the unbroken chain of prayers and commands linking you to a vast, unseen authority. Your body may belong to the Lord, but your soul is the church's domain, a sacred, contested space where faith and power intertwine in ways you will never fully understand. You lie awake at night beneath the thin wool blanket, the cold creeping through the cracks in your cottage walls like a silent reminder of your place in the world. Outside, the village is quiet except for the occasional creak of timber or the distant bark of a dog. The fields rest under the moonlight, a patchwork of mud and frost that stretches as far as you can see. And yet your mind drifts far from this small, fenced-in world, to places you have never seen but have heard whispered about in the market and the tavern. Places where the chains might not bind you so tightly. Places called cities. For centuries, the idea of the city has been a beacon of hope for people like you, serfs tied to the land and to the Lord's will, bound by laws and taxes, by toil and punishment. Cities are a different world, places where the rules change, where freedom flickers like a candle in a dark room. You have heard stories of people who slipped away under cover of night, leaving behind the mud and the sweat-soaked fields for cobbled streets and crowded markets. They became free men and women, not bound by a lord's whim but by their own hands and wits. The city was their promised land. It's no surprise that fleeing to the city became the most common form of resistance against serfdom. In England, for example, the law had a curious loophole. If a serf could live in a city for a full year and a day without being caught, he or she could claim freedom. This strange rule gave countless peasants hope and sparked many desperate midnight escapes. It was a rule that sometimes worked, sometimes didn't. The Lord's men would be sent to hunt down runaways, but the city's tangled streets and crowded alleys could hide a person like a shadow in the dark. You imagine what it must have been like stepping through the city gates for the first time? The noise, the smells, the crowds. The shops spilling onto the streets, the glow of torches lighting up the stone walls, the strangers speaking languages and dialects you barely understand. It's a world where your name might finally matter, where your labor could buy you a life instead of chaining you to a patch of dirt. It's a tempting dream, especially when the days here feel like endless cycles of hardship and pain. But escaping wasn't easy. The roads were dangerous, filled with thieves and worse, and the law was often not on your side. Many who tried were caught and dragged back like animals, their bodies marked as warnings to others. The punishment for running away was severe, whipping, branding, or worse. Sometimes the Lord would parade the captured serfs through the village, a living cautionary tale to keep the rest in line. You've seen it happen once or twice, the bleeding and the humiliation sticking in your memory like a bad dream. Then there were those who didn't escape but dreamed of freedom in other ways. You've heard rumors of serfs buying their own liberty, scraping together money from side jobs, or through the goodwill of a kinder lord. Such cases were rare, often the stuff of legends told around the hearth. The idea of owning your own land, of choosing your own path, seemed almost mythical, like a story from a faraway kingdom. But for most, the dream remained just that, a dream. You find yourself thinking of the city's towering walls and bustling streets whenever you feel the weight of the plow in your hands or the sting of a lash on your back. You picture the freedom others might have and wonder if you could ever have it too. Yet you are anchored here by law, by blood, by fear. The law, as strict as it is, had its own peculiarities. There were some towns that offered sanctuary to runaway serfs, provided they registered as townsfolk and paid certain fees. This sanctuary law created a patchwork of safe havens scattered across the medieval landscape. In some regions, a serf who reached the town could declare, "I am a freeman now," and while it wasn't always respected by lords eager to reclaim their labor, it was a glimmer of hope nonetheless. Here's a lesser-known fact. In some parts of medieval Europe, runaway serfs would sometimes adopt the identity of a wandering minstrel or a traveling merchant to mask their origins. It was a risky strategy requiring quick wit and a knack for storytelling, but it could provide enough cover to blend into the bustling crowds. Some even learned a few tricks of the trade, how to play a lute or barter goods, turning performance into survival. Whether they succeeded often depended on luck and the kindness of strangers. The village elders tell stories about a man named Joran, who fled his lord's estate with nothing but a small bag of belongings and a fiddle. Legend says he played at inns and fairs, charming his way to freedom, before disappearing into the city's maze. Whether Joran was real or a folk hero is debated by historians today, but the tale lives on, a symbol of hope and cunning against the odds. Yet, escaping was not just about physical flight. It was a rebellion of the spirit, a refusal to accept the place fate had assigned you. It was imagining a life beyond mud walls and frozen fields, beyond tithes and taxes, beyond the Lord's ever-watchful eyes. It was dreaming of owning your own time, your own labor, your own life. This dream also fed a small but persistent fear in the Lord's hearts. They knew that if too many serfs fled or gained freedom, their entire system of control might collapse. So laws became stricter. Boundaries between lordship and city rights were redrawn. Patrols were increased. Rewards offered for captured runaways. The relationship between lords and towns became a delicate balance of power and fear. In some places, this tension sparked violent conflict. Town militias would refuse to hand over fugitives, protecting those who claimed freedom within the city gates. Lords might send armed men to storm the walls or negotiate for their return. These confrontations were dangerous and could turn whole regions into battlegrounds between authority and freedom. The daily reality of serf life, however, was far from these high dramas. Most days were filled with the mundane and the exhausting: planting, harvesting, mending, praying, and dreaming. The fields demanded your sweat and your bones, but your mind wandered to what might lie beyond. You'd hear the distant church bell marking the hours, the creak of the village well's pulley, the laughter of children too young to understand the weight on your shoulders. Sometimes, when the harvest was good and the Lord generous, the village would gather for a brief respite. A feast or festival where talk of freedom floated in the air like smoke. These moments, though fleeting, were precious. You might hear an old man recount his days in the city, or a traveler describe the streets filled with craftsmen and merchants, the taverns buzzing with talk of new ideas and chances. It was during these times that hope flared brightest. But there was always the shadow of reality. The Lord's eyes were everywhere, and the consequences of stepping out of line harsh. You've seen a young woman named Elsbeth, caught trying to sneak off to the town market without permission, dragged back and forced to work longer hours as punishment. Her spirit dimmed afterward, a cautionary tale whispered in the village square. One of the strangest punishments recorded in medieval records, you hear, involved runaways being sewn into sacks filled with feathers and thrown into rivers. A bizarre, cruel spectacle meant to discourage others. Whether this was common or an exaggeration is debated by historians, but the story persists in the folklore of many regions. The fear of punishment and the pull of hope created a constant tension, an invisible cage around the minds of those bound to the land. You lie awake at night, imagining yourself slipping through dark streets, blending into shadows, becoming someone new. You wonder if that freedom is worth the risk if you have the courage to chase it. Historians still debate how many serfs actually escaped to cities and gained freedom, and how many were caught or turned back. Records from the time are patchy and often biased, leaving us with more questions than answers. Some argue that the possibility of escape was a crucial pressure valve that prevented uprisings, while others believe it was a rare occurrence, largely symbolic. But whatever the truth, the dream of freedom remained a powerful force. It fueled stories, inspired songs, and sustained hope in the hardest of times. For every serf who never left the village, there was another who dared to dream, and sometimes, just sometimes, that dream came true. You spend your entire life on the same patch of earth, the soil under your nails the same soil that will one day cradle your bones. The cottage where you sleep, struggle, and dream has never changed. Weathered wood, sagging roof, the same rough walls that have kept out storms and strangers alike. Outside your window, the familiar fields roll out, a mix of mud, grass, and patches of wildflowers you barely notice anymore. The seasons come and go like the slow ticking of a clock no one can stop, and you move with them day by day, year by year. You think about the tiny graveyard just a stone's throw from your door, no more than 100 meters away. The churchyard where your ancestors lie, where you will join them when the time comes. It's a quiet place, full of moss-covered stones and faded crosses leaning at odd angles. You know the path well, the one you've walked 1,000 times. You can almost see the faces of those buried there, not in detail, but in the shape of the land, the whisper of the wind, the murmur of the chapel bell on a foggy morning. There's a strange comfort in this. Your whole world fits within these boundaries. The small house, the muddy fields, the village, and that familiar graveyard. The land that held your birth, your toil, your sweat, will hold your final rest. You wonder if your last sight will be the same patch of sky you've seen every day, the same sun dipping behind the distant trees. This was the fate of most medieval serfs. Their lives were measured in the acres they worked, the seasons they endured, and the village they barely ever left. You belong to the land, and the land belongs to your lord, but in the end, the earth claims you all the same. It's a simple truth. Your story is written in the soil beneath your feet. The churchyard is not just a place of rest, but a reminder of your place in the cycle of life and death. Burial customs in the Middle Ages were shaped deeply by faith and tradition. Most serfs were buried without much ceremony, their graves simple and unmarked, often in a communal pit or at the edge of the churchyard. Only the wealthy or noble received elaborate tombs or inscriptions. Your grave will likely be a quiet, unadorned spot, a bare patch of earth beneath the grass, soon reclaimed by nature. But even this final act is under the church's watchful eye. The church controlled burial rites strictly, believing that proper interment was essential for the salvation of your soul. You might recall hearing that to be buried inside the church itself, the most holy spot, was a privilege reserved for the elite, while most villagers were laid to rest outside the walls, exposed to the elements and the passing seasons. This hierarchy of death mirrored the hierarchy of life. You can smell the damp earth and hear the rustle of leaves as the wind sweeps through the graveyard on a cool autumn evening. It's a scent mixed with decay and renewal, with old stone and moss, and faint hints of flowers left by mourners long gone. The quiet hum of crickets in the grass lulls your thoughts as you imagine lying beneath the soil, the same soil you've walked on your entire life. It is both a melancholy and peaceful image, a long goodbye that stretches from birth to death. You recall the rituals surrounding death in your village. When someone passed away, the body was washed and dressed by family or neighbors, then laid out in the home for a vigil. The village gathered to pray, to sing hymns, to prepare the soul for its journey. The priest would visit, perform the last rites, and speak of resurrection and hope. Though the serfs' lives were harsh and full of struggle, death was a moment that united everyone, a reminder of shared humanity. Interestingly, there was a custom in some regions where mourners would carry small pieces of earth from the graveyard home, placing it near their hearth or on windowsills to protect their households from evil spirits. This quaint practice reveals the mingling of faith and folk belief that permeated everyday life, a blending of solemnity and superstition. Whether it actually brought protection or just comfort is a matter that historians have long debated. You think about the neighbors whose names you know, whose faces are etched in your memory. Most are gone now, some from illness, others from accidents or the harshness of winter. The village is a place where everyone's life is intertwined, where births and deaths mark the rhythm of existence. The loss is always close, the sorrow familiar. The very earth beneath your feet holds secrets too. Sometimes, when digging for potatoes or turning the soil, you uncover bones, long forgotten remains of those who came before you. The sight is never a surprise, but always a reminder that you are part of an unbroken chain, a line of laborers who lived and died on this same land. There's a strange irony in this unchanging world. While your life has been marked by relentless toil, your final rest is marked by stillness and peace. The fields that demanded your sweat will cradle you in silence. The river you crossed every day will sing its song over your grave. The wind that bit through your clothes will whisper in your ears one last time. But it's not always peaceful. You've heard stories of grave robbing, especially during times of war or famine, when bodies were disturbed and bones stolen for sale or superstition. The church tried to protect the dead with consecrated ground and watchmen, but such incidents were not unheard of. Some villagers would keep charms or amulets nearby to ward off restless spirits, blending fear and faith in ways that seem strange now. Perhaps the oddest fact is that some medieval peasants believed their own graves might come alive after death. There were tales of revenants, dead bodies that would rise to haunt the living. To prevent this, graves were sometimes dug with stakes driven through the corpse, or stones placed over the chest. These rituals, part superstition and part practical precaution, reveal a world where the boundary between life and death was blurred and fraught with fear. As your days wane, you sometimes wonder if anyone will remember you after you're gone. The village moves on, new faces appear and old ones fade into memory. The land remains, indifferent to individual lives, but you take comfort in the thought that your presence, however small, has shaped this patch of earth. The church's teachings tell you that your soul will rise again, that your earthly life is but a fleeting moment before eternal peace. This promise of resurrection and salvation has been a guiding light, a balm for the hardships you have endured. Yet the reality of death, cold, final, inevitable, lingers in the back of your mind. Historians still debate how much agency serfs had over their own deaths and burials. Some argue that despite the church's control, villagers maintained personal customs and choices, adapting rites to local traditions. Others suggest that the institutional power of the church left little room for individual expression, even in death. The truth is likely somewhere in between, a complex interplay of faith, community, and personal belief. The thought that your final view will be the same landscape you've known all your life is both comforting and cruel. You imagine the sun setting behind the distant hills, casting long shadows across the fields you've tilled. The cool breeze carries the scent of earth and grass, mingled with faint smoke from village hearths. You picture the village church's bell tolling softly in the distance, a solemn farewell. You remember the stories of those who lived to see the village change, how new roads were built, how the Lord's family changed, how times grew harder or easier. Their voices linger in your memory like a fading song, a reminder that life moves forward even as you remain rooted. There is a quiet dignity in this long goodbye. A life spent in one place, connected to the land and community, marked by small joys and great hardships. The familiar faces, the shared meals, the laughter and tears, all part of a tapestry woven over generations. Your thoughts drift to the future, to those who will follow after you. Will they know your name? Will they understand the struggles and dreams that filled your days? Or will you be just another forgotten soul beneath the grass? Despite everything, you find a measure of peace in the thought that the earth will hold you gently, that the cycle of life will continue, and that in some small way, you will be part of the endless rhythm of this village, this land, this world. Tonight, as you close your eyes for the last time, the village sleeps around you, the stars wheel overhead, and the soft wind carries a whispered goodbye. Your story, like so many others, ends quietly but is never truly lost. Hey there, you've journeyed a long way tonight, through mud, cold, toil, and dreams as old as the earth itself. Now, as the story winds down, let's take a moment to breathe it all in. Imagine you're lying back beneath a soft quilt, the weight of the day easing from your shoulders. Outside, a gentle breeze stirs the leaves, carrying the scent of grass and distant rain, wrapping you in a quiet calm that stretches wide and deep. The world of the medieval serf was harsh and unyielding, a life shaped by the land, by lords, by seasons, and by unseen chains. Yet, beneath the hardships, there were moments of laughter, hope, and human connection, small sparks flickering in the vast, dark night. Your ancestors walked those fields, felt the same cold, and looked up at the same stars. In their struggles, there's a strange kind of beauty, a testament to resilience and the will to endure. As you drift now, let your mind soften like the twilight sky. The heavy boots, the rough cloth, the endless work, all begin to dissolve into quiet whispers. The fire's glow dims gently, and the village settles into a hush. Somewhere nearby, an owl calls softly, and the rustle of night creatures moves through the hedges. It's a world that's both ancient and alive, a cradle for stories that carry us through time. Your breath slows, matching the rhythm of this gentle night. Thoughts of labor and loss fade, replaced by the soothing pulse of the earth beneath you. Imagine the cool touch of the night air on your face, the distant lullaby of a stream, and the comforting heartbeat of a place that has held so many before you, and will hold many after. This series has been more than history. It's a bridge across centuries, a way to step into another time and walk a mile in worn shoes. It's a reminder that every life, no matter how humble, shapes the world in ways we may never fully see. The stories of those who came before us whisper in the wind, waiting to be heard, waiting to be remembered. Now, as your eyes grow heavy, let the last image settle gently. A field bathed in soft moonlight, a quiet village wrapped in night's embrace, and a single candle flickering softly in a small window. You are part of this endless story, connected to the past and gently carried toward tomorrow. So, thank you for sharing this journey tonight. May your dreams be peaceful, your rest deep, and your heart light. Until next time, sleep well and good night.